How did you guys like Coco? Well, please welcome the director, Adrian Molina. He also wrote the movie. I have questions from students, including from Xander Hines from the Santa Barbara Charter School. They want to know what gave you the idea to make the movie Coco.
The idea for the movie Coco, that started a long time ago, 6 years ago. And so I'm a co-director, and the other co-director, Lee Unkrich, had just finished making a film called Toy Story 3.
Did you guys see that?
Did anyone see that? Oh, cool. I worked on that one. That was the first movie I worked on. So after he finished that film, then part of the process for coming up with a new idea was to come up with 3 different ideas and play around with them and figure out what was fun and interesting. And one of his ideas was about the Mexican holiday of Dia de Muertos. And what he thought was really interesting, a really interesting story that could be told, was if you had the chance to meet all of the people who came before you, what do you think you would discover? Would you realize anything that was surprising to you? Would meeting the people who came before you change the path of your own life? These were the questions that really inspired the possibility of telling a story where we could look into our own lives and say, how would I feel if I had this opportunity? What would I do if I found out that I could meet my great-great-grandparents and ask them all of these questions? So we had that idea, and we showed it to other people at the studio, and they all said, that sounds like a really fun idea. Let's start doing some research. Let's start going down to Mexico. Let's start talking to people, and let's start doing drawings. And then from that point, we just started to learn about the traditions, to talk to people, and to create characters. And that's kind of the fun process of discovery from that point. But that's how the idea started 6 years ago.
Mrs. Bernadette's class at Peabody Charter School. Are they here? They want to know, where did the name Coco come from?
The name Coco, that's a great question. So when we're developing these stories, sometimes we have different versions. Part of the process of making a film like this is you try an idea, and some stuff works and some stuff doesn't, so you change it. But in the very earliest version of our film, there is a boy who was not named Miguel, his name was Sam, and he had a friend who he met in the land of the dead, and she was a little girl, and her name was Coco. And we ended up revising the story a lot of times after that, but we always loved this idea of a little girl named Coco. And then when we created this version of the film where Miguel had a great-grandmother, but we knew that we would see what she looked like in the past, that name felt like it was very appropriate. The name Coco itself is shortened from a name Socorro, and that's Mama Coco's full name. But it was always just, she was a character that existed in a different form very early on, but sometimes you fall in love with names and you fall in love with characters, and that was a name that stuck throughout the whole process, and we loved her so much that we decided to name the entire movie after her.
Daniel from Roseville wants to know, who is your favorite character in Coco and why?
Who is my favorite character? So one of the things that you have to understand when you write a movie is that you have to write the voices for all the characters. And one of the best things you can do to discover those voices is to fall in love with all of the characters. So you know why they're saying what they're saying. So it's really hard for me to pick. But I will say that one of my favorite characters is Mama Imelda, because she, to me, is super interesting. She's misunderstood. Like you saw in the film, Miguel knows a certain amount about Mama Imelda from the stories that he's heard, but he's kind of angry at her because he feels like she never loved music and she didn't understand this thing that he's passionate about. But the more that you get to meet her and the more you discover that she did have a passion for music, that she loved to sing, that she had her heart broken, these are all things that for me I think is one of the most fun things about discovering a character, is that you have an impression of who they are from the very beginning, but the more they act and the more they talk and the more they share themselves with you, the more you learn that they were nothing like what you expected. And for Mama Imelda, that moment where Miguel thinks that she always hated music, but there's this moment where she stands on stage and she sings to an entire crowd because that's the way that she can show her love for her family. I think that completely changed her character in everyone's minds. And so because of that, she's one of my favorites.
Lucas from Roosevelt School wants to know, people call this movie a love letter to Mexico. What was your motivation to making it so authentic?
For different people on the film, there were different motivations. For me, I'm Mexican-American myself. My mother is from Jalisco. My dad is half Mexican, and he's from Whittier, California. And I really wanted to help to create a film that expressed all of the things that I love about my family, that I love about my culture, and to let this story be a celebration of the people who are close to me and what our traditions are. For other people on the film who maybe don't come from Mexico, they were very moved by this tradition of Dia de Muertos that was all about keeping people, the memory of people who were close to you, keeping those alive. And I think for them, it was a different way of looking at this idea of the people who have come before you. And so part of what that meant in telling a story was understanding these traditions and representing them faithfully. So we really wanted to experience the traditions. We really wanted to talk to a lot of people about, what do your traditions mean to you, and why is it important that you pass that down to the next generation? And because this is a tradition that is about human emotions, about remembrance, about love, about family, the more that we could do to represent it faithfully, I think the more we knew that it would connect to people all over the world.
Well, I'm glad you brought up emotions, because there's a follow-up question from Gabriela Gomez from Patterson. Can you tell us about your personal experience, especially your emotions during the production?
Yes. So when we're making these films, like I said, we do a lot of different versions and things change over time. But one of the things that we had in this film from a very early stage was this moment where Miguel sings to Mama Coco, and that brings back her memory and she sings back to him. And I remember that the very first time I saw that scene many years ago, I got very emotional and I started to tear up and cry a little bit. But I remember talking to some of my other friends at the studio who also had that similar emotion. And what was different about this for us was we were all crying, but it wasn't crying from sadness. It was crying from a sense of being thankful for the relationships of these people and the imprint that they left on our lives. And when you feel an emotion very deeply, that you can see a story on screen and it affects you and it either brings tears or laughter, that means that that emotion comes from a true place, from an honest place. And as storytellers, one of the most powerful things you can do is find out something that is true for you and express that to someone else and have them understand. And we all felt this feeling of thankfulness for our families so deeply during that moment that we kept it in every version of the film thereafter. But if you're a storyteller, if you're interested in connecting to somebody, it's very good to check in and say, what is true for me? What makes me feel emotional? Because that's probably a good idea of where a story might be hidden.
Aspen from the Howard School here. They want to know, why did you choose a male lead over a female lead?
That is a great question. When I started on the film, because I started as a story artist, which is the drawing phase after a lot of story ideas have been discussed. The character was a little boy who liked to play music. I think that might have come from the director, kind of imagining himself in the scenario, imagining this world. But I think that it could have just as easily been a story about a little girl who wanted to play music. We really wanted to surround Miguel with a lot of influences in his life, and a lot of those influences were his abuelita, his great-grandmother, his great-great-grandmother, Frida Kahlo, to also represent this aspect of creativity as being something, artistic ability as being something that through the generations you learn from both sides, and to be able to present beautiful artists, beautiful performers, powerful heads of family. They really became role models for Miguel to figure out, how do I communicate? How do I define what's important for me, and who am I learning from? So for this story, it was about a boy. I think in the future, I would love to tell more stories about girls and how they forge their path in the world, and how they discover who they're meant to be, and what their power is in these stories.
Micah Nasta, Santa Barbara Charter School. What is the hardest part about making an animated film?
The hardest part about making an animated film, I think, is the fact that it takes a very long time. So when you begin, you've got all this excitement and this energy, but then after a while, you've been working so long and so hard, and you're not even halfway there. And you need to keep on reminding yourself that things that end up being really spectacular when they're finished, the process to getting there is slow, and it can sometimes be tedious. It's like building a house. When you see a house, it looks spectacular, and it's such a cool achievement. But when you're building a house, you do it one brick at a time. And putting down one brick doesn't feel like a very important thing. But if you remember that feeling you had when you began, and knowing that every single brick that you put down is building you closer to a spectacular end result, that's how you keep up the energy. But sometimes it can be hard to remember that while you're putting those bricks down. But you do it for long enough, and you keep your sights set on that, and after a while, you'll have achieved something really spectacular by doing a lot of really tiny things.
I just want to point out to Adrian and to all of you, if you look around you, look above you, and we're supposed to be in an outdoor Mexican village. So it's like, isn't this like the most amazing theater to watch Coco in?
This is beautiful.
Yeah, it's like, Ryan Wong from Santa Barbara Charter School wants to know, did you, oh, well, yes, sorry about that. Did you use any bodysuits to track movement to animate the characters?
Did we use any bodysuits? I don't think we did. One of the aspects of the art form of animation is that it's someone's job to create the performance. And the way they do that is they'll listen to the voices, because we always record the voices first. So they'll listen to the voice of the character, and they'll imagine in their mind's eye how they're moving, what their expressions are. And the process for those animators is to represent that with essentially digital puppets. And it's not so much a process of actually moving their bodies, although sometimes when they're trying to think of the actions, they'll film themselves walking or acting. and that'll help give them ideas. But when it comes down to actually putting the performance on screen, that's something they like I said, they do a lot of different passes where they'll do a rough pass of the performance that's very choppy, and if it feels like it feels good in a choppy form, then they'll start to refine it and add little details. So not so much bodysuits, just a lot of thinking, and then a lot of moving the mouse around to get all of the features of the character in the right place at the right time.
Tori Backstrand from Santa Barbara Charter School wants to know, why did you start making movies?
Why did I start making movies? I loved to watch movies when I was a little kid. I especially loved animation because it was a medium where you could create worlds that could only exist in your imagination. And it wasn't until I was in 6th or 7th grade that I discovered these movies don't just exist out in the world. It's somebody's job to create them. That means somebody has an idea, and they can learn the skills to draw that idea or write that idea in a script or film that idea with a camera. And whatever they imagine, animation has the power to bring to life. So like in this film, you know, a giant bridge made out of marigold petals doesn't exist in real life. But it's something that you can create in animation because we were able to imagine it, to talk about it, to draw it, and to bring those images to life. And so when I was young, I realized, oh my goodness, that is someone's job. That is something that someone pays you to do. And once I discovered that, I thought, that's something I want to do even if I don't get paid to do it. Even when I'm at home with nothing better to do on the weekend, I'm going to be drawing, I'm going to be creating characters, I'm going to be writing stories. And when I found out that that's something that you could do to create a movie, then I said, oh, maybe I could do this for the rest of my life.
Roosevelt School wants to know, what advice would you give to a young person like us who wants to do what you do when they grow up?
That is a great question. My advice to you is to not to wait to do what you want to do. If you can hold a pencil, if you can scribble some words, if you can record something on an iPhone, you've got all the power you need to tell your story. And the most important thing to be able to get to a point where you can do this for a living is just to have some practice under your belt. Anything that's worth doing is worth practicing. So if you want to be an artist, then draw every single day. If you want to be a writer, then write stories every single day and then show them to people. Read them to your parents, read them to your friends. Find other people who like to do the thing you do and make them your best friend and do that for the rest of your life. Yeah, it's just there's no reason to wait to be creative. You can be creative right now, and the more you do it, the more people are going to want you to do it for them. And it's a wonderful thing to be able to do with the rest of your life is use your talents to be able to connect to other people.
And most of the students, including the Howard School and the Peabody, want to know, will there be a Coco 2?
That is a great question. I don't know. I actually don't know. Usually when you start to make a story, what you need to know is, what do I want to tell? What's exciting about this idea? And is there a story there? So for this one, we just finished making the first Coco. Sometimes you just need to give it time and see if something enters your brain and inspires you. So we're waiting around, and we'll see if that idea comes, and you guys will be the first to know.
And did you guys like the music in Coco, the songs? So tell us about who wrote those songs.
I was very fortunate in that I wrote the lyrics to a number of these songs with an incredible collaborator named Jermaine Franco. So Poco Loco, The World es mi familia, Proud Corazon, that song at the end when they're all playing in the courtyard. I wrote the lyrics to those songs, and a lot of it was just inspired by my own experience, by my own love of my family, by the people who make me un poco loco. And that was something that I didn't know that I could do before this film. So my other advice to you is you don't have to be an expert to give something your best shot, and yeah, just put your ideas out there.
Well, let's give Adrian a warm thank you.